You are listening to Arts on the Air, a bi-weekly-ish interview show dedicated to Savannah, Georgia's artists, musicians, and authors. Each episode will feature a guest in conversation about their philosophy, practice, and current projects, as well as their thoughts on the state of the arts in our community of Savannah. Our theme music is a clip of Summer Nights by the Eric Jones Trio. It's provided by our friend Mark Chesanow, who plays with the Eric Jones Trio. Hey everyone, welcome to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with artist Darcy Melton today. Welcome, Darcy.
Thank you so much for having me, Tamara.
So excited to be here with you. Now, you were born in Savannah, and now you split your time between Savannah and Italy, which is super exciting. And you're an oil painter. I'm going to read a little bit of your bio from your website, and it seems like you focus a lot on both portraits and still lifes. So this is a bit of your words about your still lives. Darcy says, I'm passionate about capturing an object in a way that's more than just an image. There's something about luminosity, the way light interacts with color and shadow, that evokes emotion in the viewer. So you're born in Savannah, right?
Yes.
Were you involved in art from an early age?
Oh yeah. I was really blessed to go to Charles Ellis from when I was 5. And then from there I went to Savannah Arts. And I mean that having art in school as a part of my curriculum was hugely impactful. And also my whole family is artistic in one way or another, even though most of them don't do art as a career. I just was around the arts generally, from when I was really little. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
As far as going to Savannah Arts, is it like you're a child and you're already developing into the arts and your parents see that and put you in, or did you kind of beg to go there? How did that go?
I think it was a natural progression. I think both of my parents, even though maybe didn't want me to follow art as their career because they wanted me to be able to provide for myself, and eat, and pay rent.
Yeah.
I think they
Parents do think
both
about that.
they do, yeah, they're pretty practical that way usually. I think they both saw how passionate I was about art, and it just that was kind of a no-brainer, to go to Savannah Arts.
That's very cool. Did you have a specialty that you were focusing on at Savannah Arts?
Yeah, well, so I was a visual arts major, and shout out to Napoleon Wilkerson. He's a really great teacher, and all of my art teachers at Savannah Arts. But I did a summer program there at the end of 8th grade, and he taught me watercolor painting. So all throughout high school, I was drawn to that. And even after high school, that's pretty much what I did as my, quote unquote art up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. That was my thing,
Oh,
So that's
interesting.
what I focused on a lot.
I know Napoleon, he's a fellow artist with me at Gallery 209. So it's so nice to hear from a former student of his. I love that. Like
Yeah,
worlds
he's
colliding.
amazing. I should shout out my other teachers. Miss Chapman is amazing. Charles Payne was there, Mr. Shetsky, Mr. Taylor. So yeah, they're all great.
Wonderful. They'll love to hear that. Um, so when you got done with Savannah Arts, what was your next step after that?
I thought that I was going to change the fashion industry forever. So I set off to New York City and I went to college there for a year, and I loved New York, but I found that college wasn't for me. I didn't find my place there
Yeah.
in the education system, not in New York. And although I wasn't that disillusioned, I didn't think the fashion industry was this perfect, wonderful, happy place. I did underestimate how difficult it would be to make my mark on it and to feel really happy in that space.
Interesting.
So after that, I came back to Savannah. I worked retail, and then I worked at a preschool until again, like maybe 8 years ago, 6, 8, I don't know. I lose track of time. Until I decided to do art full time.
Yeah. That's interesting. You went from doing watercolor painting to going to New York to do fashion major, and fashion is so cutthroat.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, so art was always on the forefront, painting and drawing and all of that was really big for me since I was in elementary school, but I thought that fashion would be a good career path, and I was really passionate about it, watching Project Runway every night it came on, and drawing in my sketchbook while I was watching. And so I had ideas in high school that I would do something vaguely in the fashion industry. I wanted to be a designer. I also had thoughts of working with Cirque du Soleil, which was incredibly ambitious for me. In hindsight, I'm like, these people are like they work their entire lives to get to that point. Anyways, so I had an idea in my mind of being a fashion designer and an illustrator, and I always looked at fashion as more of an art than as a craft for myself. So that's kind of how it all melded in my mind. That's not how the cards played out, but I meshed all of those arts together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you touched on the Cirque du Soleil, I feel like you're lead it's like the theatricality of it that you really like. And what seems
Yes.
interesting is I guess now you've developed into doing a lot of still lifes. And I know like the fabric of a still life is a huge thing and depicting the draping of the fabric and like making it look like either velvet or satin or something. So I feel like you kind of have in some back channel way gotten into this aspect still of fabrics and draping, and it's a little bit fashiony just in that.
It is, and I'm moving more into portrait work mainly because I'm coming out of my shell a little more and being more social as a person. Where before I like even a few months ago, honestly, before I started teaching workshops, I I still I'm very socially awkward, but I'm less afraid of talking to people and being in sort of an intimate space with people, which
Yeah.
is really necessary for portrait work. So I'm moving more into doing portraits as I'm becoming more comfortable talking to people and being in a closed space with other humans. Um, so that is even more so weaving my passion for fashion, but my passion for textiles and fashion design into my work. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
I think I've talked to photographers also who do portrait work, and a lot of their work is meeting somebody and really quickly having that person have a connection with them and feeling comfortable sitting for them and, being the model for their photography portraits. So the fact that that you think of yourself as a little socially awkward probably rings a bell with the person that you're talking to as well, because I think most people think of themselves as somewhere on the scale of socially awkward a bit. So that probably endears you to them. That probably actually helps you form a connection with someone who's about to sit for you, honestly.
I hope so. And I had the great fortune I have the great fortune to have a mother-in-law who's an incredible artist, Melinda Borysevicz, just to shout her out.
Oh, that's your mother-in-law?
And yeah,
Wow, that's such a small city. That's so
I
funny.
know, small world. And
Wow.
we live down the street from her now, so even smaller. Um,
We'll talk about this obviously a lot more, that you split your time between Savannah and Italy. So is she in Italy full time now, Belinda?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
we both live in the same little town, about 5 minutes walk from each other. Yeah, it's great. And
Fascinating.
so I have been able to sit for her portraits. And the first time I sat for her, we were just in her studio, and it was really relaxed and whatever. And I mean, it always is with her. She's great. And I also sat for her during one of her workshops at the Jepson, and it was so informative because I felt safe with her sitting. And I knew that if anything, if I was tired or if I was hungry or thirsty, I could be like, hey, Melinda, I need a minute. So I felt comfortable in that space. And I learned from her how to interact with the model while other people are around and to kind of be not a protector of that person, but she was always on my side and able to facilitate, talk to Darcy as if she's a person. She's not an object, even though we're painting her. The
Yeah.
model is a real person, and she was always the one to ask me to, tilt my head or move or do anything like that. And so, anyways, that's all to say that she was a really great teacher in how to interact with someone you are painting, and also interact with students, which is it's a very different relationship.
Yeah.
So that's helped me a lot to relax in a way in front of people and to know how to interact in that sort of setting.
That seems like really good training to learn if you want to be a portrait painter, to learn how to do a good job by being the subject, or,
Hmm.
the
And
object, the
it's
subject being
hard
painted.
to model, is so
Yeah.
hard.
I feel like most people don't think to go about it that way, because I tend to think this too. When I think of being a model for artists, you just think of nude modeling, and you kind of don't automatically think like, oh, but I could also just be a fully clothed sitter for a portrait painter. But that
Hmm.
is such a smart way to go about you learning yourself how to be on the other side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity.
So just to back up, you had your year in New York and you came back to Savannah, and then you worked
Mm-hmm.
various jobs, including retail. So you were still sort of like leaning into the fashion a bit. And then you said
Mm-hmm.
that about 8 years ago was when you kind of started focusing back into your paint. Were you doing any painting at all during that period, or did you really like hang it up a bit?
I really hung it up. I did. I wasn't doing much art at all aside from being a like an assistant teacher at a preschool. So
Okay.
I got to do little crafty things, which I think brought me back into that world. And I loved it. I mean, I would spend hours cutting out little pieces of paper or planning little crafts, just because I enjoyed it. And as much as I loved my job and loved the kids that I worked with, it clearly wasn't going to be my forever career. And so I saved up money and went traveling with
Mm,
my then boyfriend, who's now my husband. And it was a couple of years of doing odds and ends sort of jobs before I really sat down and got back into watercolor, sort of idly. And from there, I think it must have been my husband who really encouraged me to do oil painting
mm,
because after getting back into watercolor painting for a few months, but really, I mean, hard into it. I like once I started, I was watercolor painting for hours and hours a day, and to the level that I really wanted to sell my work. So after that, because of Melinda, who is so my husband is Melinda's son, and he's really encouraged me. He's like, "We'll just get into it if you want to try it." And I thought, "No, it's too expensive and it's too difficult,
right,
and
right.
it's oil painting."
Yeah, and I'll
Um,
jump in and say probably people know Melinda Borysevicz, but she is like a well-known local oil painter. So he was like really coming at it from that side. He
yes.
the beauty of oil painting, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's also like, if you can do this, you can do oil painting. And I was so hard on myself and thought, there's no way I can do that. So eventually, I dug into oil painting and bought the paints and all the right brushes and everything, and realized it's a whole lot easier than watercolor painting, in fact, and really hit my groove. And so yeah, so I went from cutting out little pieces of paper every day to be, doing little arts stuff for the kids to traveling and doing not much with my art to going back into watercolor painting and eventually really finding my groove eventually as an oil painter.
I love that. Most people, I think, tend to think of those as complete opposites and think of themselves as good at one or the other, and that they would only like one or the other. So,
Mhm.
since you have spent a lot of time at both, can you maybe do a little capsule description of what you think of for each of those?
I have to say that oil painting seems way more intimidating than it is. If you can paint with watercolor, you can paint in oil. And I also have to say that coming from painting watercolor, you have your little set of colors and you have water and brushes and paper. There's not a lot of elements physically to that, where I think oil painting, there can be more, of your paints and your solvents and linseed oil and your palette and all the millions of types of canvases and surfaces. There's a lot to think about if you just wander in without any instruction. But coming from watercolor painting, I took a really simplistic approach. With watercolor painting, I was really focused on working with primary colors for the most part. And so whenever I went over to oil, that's kind of what I did. I started with ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, which, burnt sienna is not a primary color, obviously, but then, yellow and red and white, and only linseed oil. So linseed oil acted as like a replacement for water from my perspective. So in that way, oil painting was quite easy. It came quite easily. And when I realized that unlike with watercolor, you can correct your mistakes with oil painting. It opened up the world to me, realizing that it wasn't as complicated as I thought it was. So if you can make yourself start quite simply, if you're moving from watercolor to oil, if you can do that, it's gonna come quite easily, I think. I think if you're someone who's used to painting with oil moving to watercolor, there's gonna be a learning curve because you can't correct your mistakes. And so you also work the opposite way, I think. With watercolor, you're working from light to dark. And with oil, you're working from dark to light. So it's not even a matter of flipping your brain as much as it's flipping your technique in that way. So, there's benefits to both, but I find that oil is easier because you can just smush stuff around.
Yeah. I would think that maybe the biggest frustration of going from watercolor to oil is just that now there's a lot of time to wait to dry in between layers.
Oh
And
yeah.
and if you built up to where things are thick, it might, and depending on what climate you live in, sometimes things can take literally months if you have a really thick oil painting, right?
Yes, that's definitely true. And I, up until recently, I was only working with linseed oil. And if listeners, you don't know, that takes a long time to dry. If you don't use, any sort of solvent, any sort of fast drying agent, it takes a long time. And I don't know, I think it wasn't that big of a transition for me only because with watercolor, you have to be so methodical and patient, even though it does dry quickly. I already had a built into my practice was being patient and being conscious of what I was doing. So that wasn't that difficult for me to move into, even though you do have to wait a long time for the layers to dry.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing with watercolor, like you said, you start it with the light colors and you work to the dark. A big part of watercolor is just knowing when to stop. You kind of can't futz with things indefinitely because things either get just too many dark areas or they just get muddy, they just get blah looking. And you really have to have sort of restraint. And especially as you get closer to the end of a painting, of looking at it a lot more than you're actually putting marks down on the page, which can be really hard. And I guess, yeah, a forgiving thing with oil is as long as you're willing to wait for that layer to dry, you could keep going in and going over that thing forever if you wanted.
That's
Yeah.
a great though. That's a kind of a great point for any sort of art, I think. If you're thinking technically, is not overworking. And because I've worked with still lifes for so long, there's a little bit more of there's more give, for overworking. A vase is different, a vase is a vase. If it gets muddy, it's fine. No one knows what the vase looked like to begin with, as long as you get your
True.
value right. But the more I move into portrait work, I realize I really have to be conscious of not overworking certain areas and leaving them, even if I don't think they're perfect in that movement. You got to trust the process and leave your shadows the way they are. Don't overwork them and be really conscious of where you place the paint so it doesn't get too muddy. So I think that's a great concept all around.
Yeah, this is the thing when you're talking about when it's something like a recognizable thing, like a human figure or a human face, that I remember from my sort of training, you're looking at something and you're sort of objectifying it in your eye where you're looking at a certain shape of a color to lay it down, and you don't think like, oh, I'm painting an eye. You look at the shape of a certain thing and you're like, I'm going to paint
Exactly.
this shape in this color, and then I move to this shape in this color. And as you're doing it, it can feel like sometimes in your mind, you can feel like you're not doing the right thing and you're not actually painting it to be the right proportion or whatever. And you have to trust that, like, if you're really looking very hard at the shape of each color and each tone and you're depicting that, that at the end, that eye or that face or that body is going to come out looking correct, like an eye or a face or a body.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So when you first were going back into this, you said about 8 years ago, and you were like, re-delving into the watercolor and going really hard, that you were starting with doing still lifes on your own. And then after quite a while, you moved into portraits. Was the still life, was that came more naturally to you than like being like a Savannah artist and going out and doing the oak trees? What is it about the still lifes that you really loved?
Oh, they're way easier than painting oak trees was
Interesting.
most of
Okay.
it. Yeah. And yeah, I think it was ease really and almost going back to basics because I did have some background. I mean, even at Charles Ellis, we had an amazing art teacher, Miss Tia, who is still there and she's retiring soon, I think. But so congratulations to her. But I got a lot of basics of art training just drawing still lifes, and I think I really wanted to rehone my technical skills whenever I went back into art. So I did. I started with still lifes because they're such simple shapes and identifiable shapes. Like comparing it to portraits, there are shapes that make up our faces and our bodies, but they're so much harder to identify when you're starting out. So I think it was that just finding simple shapes to get back to building up my technical skill is why I chose that
Yeah.
rather than choosing something that I still find overwhelming, like you're saying, like oak trees. I mean, landscape painting to me is mind-boggling. Like it's a lot.
That's so interesting. I guess I think painting portraits is sort of mind-boggling for me. So yeah, it's kind of amazing how different people can be about that. At what point did you start displaying your art publicly?
Oh goodness, I don't know. Maybe last year, really. I
Oh,
mean,
it's not
I
recent.
had, yeah, I think it was well, no, sorry, 2023, a couple years ago, because we're in 2025 now. So I think I'll say 2023, 2022, I really started putting myself out there, applying for galleries. I mean, before that, I did have a website and an Instagram. So I was putting my art out on the internet almost since I started getting back into watercolor painting. But it wasn't really until 2022, 2023 that I put my art more into like a physical world out for people to view.
Okay, so it seems like it developed really quickly for you as far as getting shows, and then as we'll talk about doing workshops at the Jepson, if that
Yes.
you it went very quickly for you, starting to put you out in public to like building up quite a good professional career. You were
Like,
doing watercolors, you were doing still lifes, putting them on Instagram
mhm.
a bit. Were you like
Yes.
selling them a bit through Instagram, kind of?
I had an Etsy, I think is where I was selling things, and I was doing the thing that, I mean, I had no idea how to put my art out into the world as a as a somewhat brand new artist. So I was doing the thing where you put it on, websites that'll put your art on t-shirts and mugs and
Right.
laptop cases, like I didn't know what I was doing. So I had that in an Etsy shop for a long time. And it really wasn't until, I mean, I think I did like a Sulfur Street Fair in 2022 with my watercolor work before I delved into oil. I did all these little cat illustrations in ink and watercolor, which are still very dear to me. And it must have been the year after that that I started doing oil, and really just from doing the Sulfur Street Fair, I just kept putting myself out there, I guess, with
Yeah.
oil painting. So I don't know. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It sounds like literally within 2 or 3 years, you started putting her out publicly. You started delving into oil paint. You also started going into portraits. A lot of things just clicked into place for you right around 2022. That's so interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. The Sulfur Street Fair, I'm glad you brought that up. I kind of always recommend that as a really great way to get into doing street fairs too, because they have a really great price point for their booth fee. And then
Mhm.
also they have an option where you can ask them to put up the tent for you. So you don't have to buy your own tent, which is
That's
huge.
huge.
So I
Yes.
just a shout out again to Sulfur Street Fair. If people are looking to get into craft fairs, that is just such a great thing to have out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they're so nice.
Did you ever have a studio at Sulfur or were you always working from home when you lived in Savannah?
No, I couldn't afford a studio. I mean, whenever I was in Savannah, making rent was tip-top priority for a home. So no, I never had a studio at Sulfur, although I would say if that's something that people can afford and make work for their lives, I think that's a really great opportunity having a studio outside of your home. I think I miss a lot not having a community of artists around me all the time. So
Yeah.
I think if you can find any sort of studio space near other artists, it's such a benefit to just have other creativity going on around you, because that's going to inevitably turn into some other sort of beneficial connection.
Yeah, it's a lot like having an exercise buddy that you hold each other accountable, honestly. Um,
Absolutely.
I saw on your website it looked like it was around 2023 that you started teaching workshops at the Jepson. So
Yeah.
that was pretty quickly after you started kind of going public with your art and delving into the oil paint. How did that come about that you were doing those for them?
Big shout out to Kip at the Jepson. I was an intern in, I think, eighth grade for what was their art museum, and it was amazing. It was really cool. And so I just tidied up the little art museum and repaired the little things that needed to be repaired that weren't, highly technical. Um, and so I knew Kip from that, and I just kind of cold call reached out, said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me. Here's kind of it wasn't even a portfolio, but kind of here's my work. Would you be open to having me teach a workshop?" And he said yes. And it was nerve-wracking and mortifying, but it was really, really incredible. And I had already I used to go to Asbury Memorial, which is a great place to go if you're looking for a church home. Not that I'm religious anymore. That's neither here nor there. But they're awesome. And they had a like an arts group come do your own thing in the social hall or paint
Oh,
along with the group. And so I'd done that a few times, and then I stepped in for Carol Anderson, who was leading the group at the time, and realized that I really loved kind of not even teaching, but guiding people through art, giving them tips, just because I happened to get them through the slog that I'd been doing of kind of teaching myself. So I knew a couple people through that class who wanted to come to a workshop with me. So I already had, I mean, two or three people built up in my little class. So yeah, so it was really fortuitous. And it was also nice to have friendly faces who are willing to take a chance on me teaching. And in my class, it wasn't as scary because I could look over and be like, okay, they look happy. I think I'm
yeah.
doing all right.
So it was for fellow adults, your workshop?
Yes, yeah.
What did you all paint?
What did we paint? We painted something white. We painted a still life. That's
Okay.
wild that I can't remember what we painted, but it was a simple still life.
About how many people would you have in these workshops that you do?
My goal is to have 10. That's a really nice number. And that's usually the physical space is usually pretty much limited to 10 people because rooms are only so big generally. And that's a nice number of people that it's not so few that you all feel too awkward, but it's enough that you can kind of make little friends and look at other people's work and stuff like that. So I think my first workshop I had 10, and that's about how many people I typically had.
I mean, it sounds like a great way to learn that you liked this painting in a group of being part of a member of people who arrived at a place and painted near each other. But going from that to being like, I'm the leader and you're in front of the class. And I assume maybe you start with a demo of your own and then
Mhm.
kind of walk around and look at them working. Was that a huge learning curve to suddenly being like, I'm going to be in front of them demonstrating what we're doing?
Oh yes, that was wild. It's wildly different to paint in front of people and to tell and to teach other people is completely different from working in your own studio. And we were painting a lemon. I've now remembered. Obviously, we were painting a lemon. And so I had done, I'd practiced essentially. I'd done dress rehearsals in my own studio of how I was going to be doing this and, talked to my pretend students and done a demo. So I was somewhat prepared knowing kind of how I wanted to break up the lesson. But yeah, it's completely different to have eyes on you while you're painting and then having to voice your entire method throughout the process it's flipping your mind in a way.
Yeah, I would think again, just to go back to the exercise component, it's like leading a group exercise where you have to like do it, you're huffing and puffing going through it, and you have to speak as you're doing it. Maybe it's hard
Hmm.
to be painting and then be talking at the same time. That's a whole
Yes.
other level of skill that maybe people don't even think about.
Yeah, it was very difficult, but it was also something that I don't want to say it came naturally because that makes it seem like I didn't work hard at it, but it was something that I enjoyed. And so I was willing to work for it. And also,
Yeah.
I think humility became a big part of it. Like I had to remember and recognize that if I mess up, it's okay because everybody does. And that became part of my teaching is that if you mess something up, you've done it the first, you've done it once, you can always do it again. So that helped me be really comfortable with teaching is knowing that I'm not going to do it perfectly, but I know how to do it. So just teach what you do and know that you're going to make mistakes and move through it.
Yeah. And I guess also that's part of the lesson is like you're teaching the students that as you're painting, it might not look great at the beginning and they have to learn how to work through their mistakes as well. So
Hmm.
what better way than to see the professor inadvertently be doing that as well?
Yeah,
That's
that's
funny.
what I hope and think.
I love that. And then it looks like you also branched out into doing a few, at least one workshop at Arts on the Coast in Richmond Hill.
Yes, they're amazing. Yeah, they're the best. My friend Carol Hartley has been a member with them for a long time and encouraged me to reach out with that to them and host a workshop, which I did very similarly to what I did at have done at the Telfair. And yeah, it was just absolutely amazing. Very similar setup with just the sweetest, kindest, loveliest people.
I guess I forgot to ask, were the workshops, is it a one-time session or is it multiple?
Yeah, I think every workshop I've done, well, most have been just a one-off, one-day
Okay.
situation. I think at the Jepson, I did a two-day workshop, but yeah, usually it's just a one-day, one-off situation.
Yes, you have to pick kind of a small object that people can churn out and feel pretty good about themselves at the end of a few hours.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I try to tell everybody gently but firmly that the goal isn't to have something that you're going to absolutely love and hang on your wall and it's to learn so that you can take
Yeah.
those skills home with you and then create something that you really love and want to hang and keep in your home forever.
And I guess the good part, I mean, if it's something small, like just a lemon or a bottle or something, they can take a photo of that. They could go home and like recreate that and really
Hmm.
try to perfect
Hmm.
it if they really wanted
And
to.
that's what I try to do is I try to pick objects or things that are similar enough that everybody has a mug in their house. You're not going to necessarily want to have a painted mug on your wall, but that is something that everybody can practice with at home. And everybody has an egg or a lemon or something like that. And you can combine those elements to make a really beautiful still life. And also it's something that you can take, from the classroom to your house and easily recreate, you know?
Absolutely. I did want to ask, when you got back into watercolor and then also when you were studying the oil painting, were you literally just doing all this on your own, or were you using like YouTube tutorials or anything like that?
Yes, I rely heavily on YouTube or tutorials. Absolutely.
It's amazing what's
And
out there. It's incredible.
oh, it's so amazing what people put out into the world for free just to help other people out is
Yes.
amazing.
Yes.
Um, and so I hope one of my goals for 2025 is to create some of those videos myself to teach other people. Just pretty simple still life stuff, potentially a bit of portrait painting, I'm not sure yet. But yeah, so I looked at a lot of YouTube videos, YouTube tutorials. There's also so much now on Instagram. I mean, I still, when I scroll through Instagram, I'm saving videos to look back at, you know, of little tutorials. So I did a lot of that and a lot of, I don't know, just searching on the internet for guidance.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, Melinda, my mother-in-law, did give me a couple of, I mean, she would give me as many lessons as I want, but I try not to tax her too much. But she gave me a couple of in-person sort of still life lessons when I was first getting into oil painting, which was huge to have somebody you trust as a teacher with hands-on lessons. So
Yeah.
a bit of that. I feel like I'm self-taught is technically the term, but that feels like such a lie because like we're talking about, Melinda's helped me and I've done a couple, you know, workshops and I know so many artists who I've watched work in addition to watching YouTube videos. So I have learned from people. I have studied. I just haven't studied, you know, in a
Yeah.
classical way, I guess.
I think that still would be called self-taught because I think the whole point is that there's not like a schedule of classes that you have to show up and you're going for a degree and it's laid out. You are the one, you're self-directed in it. You've sought
That's
out,
true.
it hasn't just fallen in your lap. So maybe, it's like self-taught slash self-directed, honestly.
Self-facilitated for sure.
Yeah. Did Melinda live here in Savannah when you were getting lessons from her?
No, that was whenever we were both in our little town, Padula,
Okay.
at this point. So that was really only, I mean, I don't know, a few years ago.
Okay. Yeah, let's
Mhm.
talk about how did you transition into living half your time in Savannah and half your time in Italy? How'd that come about? That's big.
Yeah, I mean, it was a trickling sort of a thing. So my boyfriend and I were traveling for a while and sort of house sitting and staying at little Airbnbs and things like that for a couple of years. And at the same time, Melinda had decided to visit Italy for a little while, and then she went for her citizenship. So she did all of the work of getting her citizenship. And then my now husband, because they're related, anyways, blood right citizenship in Italy. She was able to get her citizenship, and then he was through her. We got married so that I could eventually get my citizenship. So that is all to say, it's been sort of a little slow progress to living here full time. We came and visited maybe 5 years ago. We visited for 3 months at a time and ended up kind of flip-flopping back and forth between the States and here as much as we could until in the last couple of years, I was able to get my residency. So I can live in Italy full time, basically within that residency limit. So yeah, it's just kind of been like a slow trickle to living here full time, more or less.
And the way that you got your residency, is that through your husband, or is that a thing that people can do if they go and live there for a while?
I got it through my husband. It's tricky to say. I know that I had no other right to be here other than having married him.
Okay.
I know that if you are a student, you can be here for longer than regular 3 months. But that's I got a green card marriage, but don't tell Italy that. No, I love him, so we would have been together either way.
Hopefully there are no high up Italian officials who are listening
Yeah.
to this little podcast in Savannah. You're probably safe. I think you're okay. And your husband, his name is Nathaniel Mellor. I saw his
Yes,
a couple projects together. Is he an artist as well?
he's a writer.
And the
Mhm.
town you live in is called Padula, is that right?
Yes,
Where
yes.
in Italy is that located?
So it's 2 hours-ish south of Naples on it's a hilltop town, little hilltop medieval town.
Okay. How did Melinda pick that town? Was there anything particular about it for her as an
Oh,
artist or?
she years ago was looking for like a self-guided retreat sort of situation, I think in North Carolina, and just kind of put out a question to friends, asking if they had a place for her to stay. And no one had anything in North Carolina, but someone said, "Hey, I have an apartment in Italy if you want to rent that." And she said yes, and just, stayed. She came to do a sort of residency for herself and ended up kind of never leaving.
Gosh, that's amazing.
I know.
I knew her name because I used to work at Shop Scad years ago, and she had these stunningly beautiful oil paintings hanging there. So it's
Yeah.
funny in this like just small city to come across her name now through you.
Yes, Savannah is a very small town, I feel like.
At this point now, is it 6 months there, 6 months here, or is it more frequent that you go back and forth?
It's hard to say. It changes every year. In 2024, it was 6 months on, 6 months off, with a couple periods in between of coming back and forth, even more than that.
Yeah.
But there have been other years where I'm here in Italy more than in Savannah. But I have found that I'm pulled back more and more to Savannah. So I don't know. It's hard to say, but I always miss either place whenever I'm no matter where I am, I have a longing for the other place. But I think it ends up, kind of evening out to about 6 months on, 6 months off
Where do you live when you come back to Savannah?
with my family,
Okay.
who are amazing and just so gracious. Yeah.
Do you have a whole painting set up in your parents' house that you come back here and can just delve right back into it, or what do you do?
And not really. I have what probably should not be a mobile studio that I move around, in that I have a great big wonderful easel that my dad found for me basically out of the trash, and it's awesome. And so, but it is very large and hard to move around. But I move that to whoever's house I'm staying at. Like most recently, I was staying at my grandma's, so it was in her living room, just with all of my stuff strewn about.
Yeah.
When I'm at my mom's, I use half of my childhood bedroom as my tiny little studio, so it changes every time.
And are you doing a thing where in the periods where you're back in Savannah, you hit the ground and you're going to organize workshops, you're going to try to be in group shows at location gallery, et cetera, that kind of thing? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. Yes, yes. I do my best to sort of organize to plan ahead, which is not my strong suit, but I try to plan ahead, to be in Savannah for art fairs. Like I've come back for the Slam Art Fair before, and also the Isle of Hope Art and Music Festival. So I try to plan around events like that and coincide workshops with that time. And I do. I hit the ground running every time, and just I bombard myself with art events when I'm there and try to even that out with seeing family.
Yeah. So we're doing this interview, I should say, over Zoom, and I see that you're in your art studio, you're in Italy.
Mhm.
So in Italy, it's like you have a full apartment, you have a room where you do your art. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Are,
and we're in such a small town we're very fortunate to have the apartment that we do, but because we're in such a small town it's abandoned is not the right word, because people definitely live here, but a lot of people moved out of the medieval part of our town to down in the valley, which is like the 1980s part of the town, which is not as cute. But they moved out, in the 80s and 90s, people moved down there. So there are a lot of vacant houses up here. So that means that we pay not that much in rent to have a lot of extra rooms in our house. So I
oh,
have, yeah, I have what is like an office size sort of space as my studio.
okay. So people could look into Padula. This seems like a wild loophole in the expensive
Mhm.
housing market that we're all dealing with.
Oh yes, that's part of the reason that we're here, is because Savannah just became, I mean, there's no way that I could be a full-time artist the way I am and live full-time in Savannah. So that's part of the reason that
Oh.
we are here.
And how are you making a living on your art during the periods where you're in Italy? Give us
Well,
tell us how we can move to Italy and become full-time artists. This is fascinating.
okay. It's a bit of I live between two places, obviously, and I haven't been able to make my way into the Italian art world yet, which moves differently than the Savannah art world.
Yeah.
And part of that is just because I know people in Savannah, which isn't to say that I'm incredibly well connected. I just, you run into people at galleries, and there are open calls and things like that. Where here, I just don't know as many artists, so I haven't been able to mesh into that world. And like I said, we are living in a little medieval town. There's no galleries here. There's no art fairs in the town where we are. So it's a bit different. So a lot of what I do here, I send back to the US or send off to other parts of Europe for different shows. So I'm a bit like a hermit when I'm here. I'm just in my studio working, and then I send my art out into the world.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So yeah, so a lot of my income comes from art sales in the States or other galleries, if I ever get into shows in other parts of Europe, as well as doing workshops in the States.
So you're doing a lot of packing and shipping of your art. It sounds like it's a big
Yes.
part.
Yes.
Do you still have your Etsy shop?
I don't. I just have my website, and another way that I make a lot of income is I do commissions, and I've done a couple big ones recently. So people
Okay.
will reach out, and I'll paint it. I end up painting every time, just maybe because of my planning. I end up painting half of it here and then half of it in the US.
Oh my gosh.
And then I know it's not the best laid out plan. So I end up doing that and then sending it off to, wherever it needs to
Okay.
be.
So it's portrait commissions that you take on if anybody listening
Yes.
wants something like that.
Oh,
Okay.
yes. If anybody would like a portrait commission, please let me know.
Okay. How do you get your supplies while you're there?
Oh, I actually am just about to make a big order of art supplies this evening. Ideally, I can go to the shop and get them, but the art shops around me, the closest one is maybe 45 minutes away by car. But if I'm ever in Rome or Florence, which sounds like I travel a lot, I don't. I just happen to be there sometimes. I'll go to a couple great little art stores that I know and just stock up and fill
Yeah.
my suitcase with supplies. But usually I have to order online.
Okay. And how is your
Mhm.
Italian? Uh,
It could be better,
Like,
but
were you already working on this, or did you have to suddenly catch up and be like, "Oh my God, I'm living in Italy a bit. I need to start learning Italian."
it was that a bit for sure. But because we did kind of come over here incrementally, but like we weren't on vacation, but we were here for like short stints to begin with. So I got to learn a little bit at a time in that way. And
Yeah.
then it was full immersion, once we decided to live here. But I have to say that in the town where we live, people don't necessarily speak Italian to each other. They speak dialect, which is not Italian at all. It comes from the Naples language, the Napolitano dialect or language. So, anyways, okay, so I speak in Italian to people like at the grocery store or the coffee shop, and they in turn, in their mind, are probably speaking dialect and then speak Italian to me. So there's
Okay.
a trilingual thing going on. But yeah, I'm getting better at
Yeah.
Italian. I should work harder than I do, but yeah, I mean, I can have conversations.
That's awesome.
It's kind of nice to be here where people do not that many people do speak English, and I'm forced into it. I'm kind of grateful for that, even though I probably sound very dumb, but
Yeah.
let's double through.
You're trying. What are some things you miss about Savannah when you're in Italy?
Oh goodness. I don't know, everything. But that's not to say that I'm not happy to be here. I don't know. There's this is going to sound so silly, but there's some sort of magic in Savannah. There's like an energy which can sometimes go toxic in a way, but and I feel like I'm always drawn back to Savannah, but there's just like a happy hum. I don't know how to explain it that happens in Savannah. And I don't know. I miss the humidity, which I
Mm.
know people are probably think is horrible, but it's just like a nice warm hug. Here, the air is so dry. I miss the oak
Interesting.
trees. We're on a mountain, so and everything's kind of stone and paved over, just because of the medieval architecture. So I miss being underneath trees. But yeah, there's benefits to both
So
places.
interesting. When is the next time you're planning on being back here?
Probably early summer. That's the plan. So late May, I think.
So you really want the humidity. You're seeking that out.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I really am.
I want to talk a bit about how you have these two other projects that you're doing with your husband, Nathaniel Mellor. So you have a podcast called Only a Bag that looks like it's a sustainable guide for traveling and living in Italy. Can you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, so we also have a podcast if you guys want to listen, fellow podcast listeners, at Only a Bag podcast. And so we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and it was mostly to share our random bits of knowledge that we'd accumulated by necessity from traveling. Um, and it's morphed into a weekly, as long as we're being diligent, podcast, just a bit with travel tips and sometimes a little bit of news, which is going to affect people's travel, as well as little small tidbits of history. Our recent episode was on La Befana, who is the Epiphany witch. So she's a witch, a lot like Santa Claus, who comes and delivers gifts. And then sometimes it's like, how do trains work is an episode. So it's just a fun way of disseminating the bits of knowledge that we've gathered.
Is it kind of general European travel, or do you think is it very specific to Italy? I know
It's
trains
pretty
are
specific.
a thing
It's
about
pretty
Italy,
specific
right?
to Italy. We
Okay.
started off being quite generic, which I think hampered us because we were trying really hard to encompass everything, and there's no way to do that.
Yeah.
So it's become a lot more personal experience mixed with, highly researched information about Italy.
Okay. Is there any kind of science or like rubric that we can apply to Italian trains, or are they just living on their own wild, whimsical timeline?
Okay, you would think that they would be the wildest, most unpredictable sort of form of public transit. And sometimes they are. But Train Italia was recently ranked #1 among all European trains, which is the government funded. I don't know the national train system of Italy, and they run really well, to be honest. Unfortunately, so we live quite near a train track, but it was in the 1980s they did like a big. It seems like they did a big overhaul and kind of got rid of transit systems and lines that weren't being used as much. So it's going to be revamped where we are, but we're still very hard to get to. You have to take a bus to get to our town, but in general, it's a great system.
I love this. It's funny you're talking about that. I live very close to the train track that runs through all of Starland and Savannah.
hmm
So you're like my sister on the other side of the world.
Yeah, actually it's funny you mentioned that. That's something I miss about Savannah. Not living when I'm in Savannah, I don't live that close to the train track, but when I'm with my mom, we're sort of in Midtown near the Red and White, and so you can still hear the train from a nice distance, and it's really lovely. So I do miss that about being there.
It looks like the second project that you're doing with your husband is an arts and literature magazine called Pigeon Review, that you two are the editors. Can you
Yes.
talk to us about this?
Yes, okay. So I have to say that this is a project that has been put on hold for the moment while we're focusing a lot more on our own careers and a lot more on only a bag. But we ran Pigeon Review for 2 or 3 years, I think, and it was an online writing and arts publication, which was just a really incredible experience. That during COVID we had not a lot to do,
Mm.
and we were both looking for a place to I guess more Nathaniel at the time because he was writing more for public consumption than I was doing art for public consumption. So he was looking for places to put his writing out into the world and was struggling to find the right place or the right people. So we started Pigeon Review and it was so nice to interact through email essentially with so many artists and writers and something that I didn't realize just to toot our own horn, I didn't realize that we would be different from others in that I don't know how to say this, like we got a lot of compliments of people saying that we not just cared about what people were doing, but we put honestly way too much thought into sort of how people submitted. So we had, I don't know, we tried to be as accessible as possible. And I think people really were grateful for that. And in turn, so many people we talked to put their whole hearts and minds to submitting and communicating. And it was just a really lovely project that we had the opportunity to do. So
Yeah.
hopefully that will become something else in the future. I'd like to make it something a lot more physical, do like gallery pop-ups, not just with art, but with writing as well. So it's not gone forever, but it is on the brakes right now.
What you talk about putting a lot of time and effort into it and maybe even too much. I feel like that was a very COVID thing where people had a lot of time and maybe just to help with our mental health. I think a lot of people turned
Yes,
delving really, really deeply into a project in a way that you would not have been able to do at a normal time of life. So
absolutely.
I like the fact that you said that it's on pause for now, but you could pick it up at any time. And you're in this very flux state right now with establishing your residency. So once that calms down, we can keep an eye out for this Pigeon Review. Who knows when it might be picked up
Please
again.
do.
And like you said, it might turn into you being like a curator in public of public shows. So
hmm
I love
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. I would love to because it was, I knew there were a lot of people who wanted to get their work out into the world, but I didn't realize how many of us were having the same struggle of, wanting to find a kind, sort of ethical place to put our work out. So I'd love to be able to be that organization again.
What does the name Pigeon Review refer to?
We were living in this lovely city called Perugia, which is up in Umbria. I think it's in Umbria. And just, I mean, it was filled with pigeons. And that's something we also saw in Savannah. So I think we were having this moment of nostalgia for Savannah and talking about how, like, what did we want the idea of this organization to be? And it was kind of at first to take on work that other people didn't see beauty in. So like taking on like publishing things that other people saw as mundane or something that got rejected from another publication because we found that, not everybody loves pigeons, but they're incredibly beautiful. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where that name came from.
That's funny. Yeah. So that's sort of a literal meaning of what you're surrounded by
Yeah.
and also like a conceptual meaning as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you wanted to start putting your work out into YouTube videos, but it looks like you do have a YouTube channel. You have some videos, right? Should we not?
I do.
We talk about
Maybe
this at all, or?
everybody, yeah, definitely check it out in a month or so, maybe.
Okay.
No, I do. I think I have like an ASMR video, and it's okay. So I really love the sound that my the brushes make on canvas and on panels, which I work on. So that's something that I wanted to put out, but it was also a way for me to put myself out into the world without using my actual voice because I was still too nervous to do that. So yeah, I'd like to do some more of that, but also do a lot more instructional videos with using my actual voice and teaching.
Okay. Well, you have your own podcast, and then also you're doing this podcast, so maybe you're getting used to your voice is out there. So
Yes, yeah, I
you
threw
might as well
myself
have your
into
voice out
it.
there for your actual art as well.
Yeah, yeah.
That's funny you mentioned that. I've done a few, I don't do a whole lot on social media, but I have in the past when I was working on a piece that involved a lot of gold leafing. And I noticed that when you are in the step where you're using your brush to brush away the extra gold leaf, that it sounds nice. So I have done at least one video on Instagram and titled it ASMR, just the
Mhm.
sound of the brush pushing the gold leaf away.
Yeah, I love that because there's so many nice sounds. And I have to say, so my husband really liked ASMR for a long time. And not that I need to get on a soapbox about it, but whenever I look it up now, there's some, not to criticize, but there's some interesting videos out there that I don't find very relaxing or nice sounds. But there are so many like mundane daily sounds that are just beautiful. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, I like that.
No, I can't recall at the moment what that actually stands for, ASMR. Not to put you on the spot. Do you remember? I don't know.
Oh, goodness.
I'm gonna throw it
No.
in the description of this episode. I'll look it up
Okay.
just so the people who are listening to this who aren't super internety social media nerds can know what we're talking
Yes. Thank
about.
you.
Okay. Is there anything looking ahead to 2025? So you said you're going to be coming back to Savannah, hopefully at the beginning of summer. What are you looking to delve into and get into more for the year?
Yeah, help me manifest this, everybody. I hope to be in a few more gallery shows, a few more group shows. I'd like to do more art fairs and at least one workshop, potentially with Arts on the Coast, portrait workshop in the beginning of the summer. So yeah, I don't know. Stay tuned. Workshops, gallery shows, art fairs. Fingers crossed.
Fantastic. We'll keep an eye on your Instagram for that. Like this has been so fascinating to talk to you about all of this and so excited for your life and to see how this develops in Italy. Is there, any kind of final words you want to say to us about maybe Savannah or anything? Since now you have distance from Savannah, it's a lot easier to speak about something once you're outside thinking back on it.
It's gonna sound so silly, but like, live in the moment, which is the like I don't know. Everybody says that, obviously, but it's something that I have really learned to do is to appreciate where I am when I am there with both places that I currently live and with every place because we have moved around a lot and we've been done house sitting for months on end. So every place is special in its own way. So if you can just, bask in the specialness of that place, it can make your life a lot better and your art.
I love that. Well, this has been really a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to when you're back in town in public, seeing you. I will post a link to your website and a link to your Instagram, and we can see your beautiful oil portraits that you're working on. They really are stunning, and they're
Thank you.
very classical European looking. So I feel like it's perfect for
Oh,
you to
thank
be
you.
actually in Italy.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So this has been an interview with Darcy Melton, and this is Tamara Garvey. Thank you for listening to Arts on the Air.
Thank you so much for this.
You're so welcome. My pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.